Now this edition will contain spoilers because the topic that I'm covering today is trackers. So this could be anything from a tracker that has been placed on a mobile phone so the hero can track our heroine. The tracker could be in a piece of jewellery, or it could be an actual tracker that the hero has implanted somewhere on our heroine's body. Now there are quite a lot of Mafia romances where this does actually happen because our heroes are generally so obsessive, so possessive that they cannot bear the thought of not knowing where their woman is at all times, and therefore somehow, some way, they generally do attempt to track them. But what I've got here is a collection, like I say, of something just fairly benign, like tracking on a phone, all the way through to forcibly implanting a tracker on a body. But not only that, but the tracker is used in an interesting way. So it's not just the typical, oh, he's put the tracker in, so now he's going to be able to rescue her from a situation. Some of that does happen, yes, but there are other ways in which these trackers end up being used as plot points in the story, which I think are really interesting. I'm going to attempt to not give away too much, so not to really spoil exactly how the tracker is used, but I will give you hints, and therefore, like I said, this may contain spoilers. So the first one that I want to talk about is Destroy Me by Michelle Hurd. This is a recent read for me, and it's book 1 in her Corrupted Royals series. This is not exactly a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but it does have a Romeo and Juliet vibe to this one. We were following Misha, who is part of the Bratva, and Aurora, who I believe is an Italian mafia princess, and their two families in particular are rivals with one another, so they are sort of sworn enemies. Now, at the very start of this book, Misha is just about to enter the Monarch Academy, and the Monarch Academy is a mafia school. He is there to learn how to be an enforcer, so he's training with his friends to be an enforcer. And our heroine has just turned 18 and she's gone out for her birthday with some friends, and she's gone to a nightclub, and she happens to be at the same nightclub as Misha. While she's there's actually an attack on the nightclub. There is a bomb explosion, and Misha and Aurora end up being trapped in the rubble together, and Misha ends up saving Aurora's life. Now they're trapped in the rubble together for a couple of hours, and during that time they do form a connection with each other. They start to talk to each other and share secrets with one another, and Aurora in particular is very taken with Misha. Now when they finally get rescued and taken out of the rubble, Misha learns exactly who Aurora is, and he's kind of like enraged by the situation because obviously she's his mortal enemy and they're not supposed to be together, and so he kind of like disappears from her life and doesn't talk to her again. No intentions of ever seeing her again. Meanwhile, Aurora has no idea who he is, and just remembers this night, this very special night, and this person. She's kind of holds him quite high on a pedestal, and she believes that he's her Prince Charming, and so she's not been with anyone since because she's really holding out hope that maybe one day she'll bump into him and they will be together. Well, she finally gets her wish a couple of years later when her father sends her and her friend to the Monarch Academy themselves to learn how to fight and use weaponry and that sort of thing. And of course that is where she bumps into Misha once more, and this time, like I say, 2 years have passed and Misha is now kind of in his 3rd year of school there, and they finally come face to face, and Aurora realises exactly who he is. And like I say, they are sworn enemies, and so now they're in a situation where they both still have feelings for one another, still attracted to each other, but they can't be together because they're part of rival families. And Misha does a typical thing where he is really horrible to our heroine, tries to put her away, tries to convince himself and his friends that he doesn't have feelings for her, but their attraction is too much for them, and they end up having a relationship anyway, and then trying to figure out how they're going to make it work when they're rival families, and what they need to do to convince their families they need to be together. Now the tracker in this one is the lightest form of tracking, and that's because at one particular point in the story she leaves Monarch Academy to meet her parents. It's her mother's birthday and she heads off to this party, and he basically says to her, I want to know where you are, activate your equivalent of Find My Friends on your phone so I can keep an eye on you, can see where you are, make sure you're safe. And it's at that particular point where her car is ambushed, and of course our hero is going to use the tracking on her phone to find her and rescue her. So from one extreme to the other, we've gone from pretty light tracking through to the most severe form of tracking, which is a physical GPS tracker under the skin, and that is with Bloodied Hands by Adelaide. This is book 1 in her Belandi crime syndicate. This is a second chance romance between two childhood sweethearts, Matteo and Ivory. Like I said, they were childhood sweethearts, really in love, but Matteo has to break it off with her because his father threatens to unalive her if their relationship goes any further, and so Matteo has to do the heartbreaking thing, which is to convince her that he doesn't care for her, break it off with her to save her life. And ever since then, Ivory's kind of been distraught and heartbroken. She can't believe he did it, and is very angry about the situation, but still they both move on with their lives. 10 years pass, and by this time Matteo is now head of his criminal organisation. He still very much cares for our heroine, but he doesn't try and rekindle the flame with her because he knows he's in a very difficult and dangerous situation and he doesn't want to drag her into it. That is until she comes back into his life of her own accord, and when she does that, he decides that he's not going to let her go. Because what actually happens is she is in a bank when there is a hold up in the bank, and these criminals come in to obviously steal money, and when one of the robbers sees that she is there, realizes who she is, he asks for forgiveness and basically says, please don't tell Matteo that it's me. Please tell him that I didn't touch a hair on your head, and kind of runs off all scared. And she can't figure out why this would be, so she goes to confront Matteo, and it turns out that he has been protecting her this whole time, and pretty much everybody who's a criminal in their city where they're in knows that she is completely off limits. And so, like I said, because she's gone to confront him after all this time, she puts herself back in his path, and now he's not going to let her go. But of course, he still does have enemies. Her life is going to be at risk, and so he's pretty obsessive, pretty possessive, and very dominant, and he forces her to get a tracker, like I said, under her skin so that he can track her at all times. Just in case she is kidnapped, he'll be able to find her and rescue her. So another one with tracking, with the tracker under the skin, is Hands by S.J. Tilley. This is book 4 in her Alliance series. In fact, quite a few men in this series do track their women, but I really enjoyed Hands, and I really wanted to mention it in this particular video. So, as the name of this book suggests, we are following Hands, who is our hero, and our heroine is Cassie, or Cassandra. Now, these two are actually neighbours. Hands is actually an assassin, and he is very loosely connected to the Alliance, which is a mafia kind of syndicate, and we've seen him in the other books. Like I say, Cassie is his next door neighbour. She's an ordinary person, not at all connected to the mafia, but when she first moves in, she sees Hands and she is immediately attracted to him, thinks he's absolutely amazing, and from that moment keeps trying to get his attention, speak to him, get to know him, but he kind of hides from her a little bit. Every time he sees her coming, he kind of hides, so he never has to have a conversation with her, but he's also very intrigued by her. Now, she decides that she's going to win him over, and she does this by baking him things. So she is, you know, she tries to make him food and bake for him, and she'll leave the food that she's made in little Tupperwares on his porch. So when he comes home, he basically gets that as an offering, and then he eats it. He washes the Tupperware and then returns it to her when she's not in. So they have this kind of exchange where she keeps baking him goods, he keeps eating them and returning the Tupperware empty. Now the thing is, she's a terrible cook. She cannot bake for her life, and everything she makes is just awful. But Hans is so taken with her and so humbled by the fact that she keeps cooking for him that he forces himself to eat every bite. I mean, he could throw it away and never tell her, but he doesn't. He eats everything that she makes for him, and it's so endearing and so sweet. And of course, Hans becomes quite obsessed with her, and so even though he kind of keeps ignoring her, doesn't want to speak to her face to face, he does keep his eye on her. He keeps watching her. He sets up cameras so he can make sure that she's okay. He goes into her house to make sure that she's locked the doors and that sort of thing. And then when she goes away for work, she actually goes to Mexico, I think, for work. He actually follows her to Mexico, keeps a track of her, of where she's going. And when she is in a bit of an ambush and these this cartel is going to capture her, Hans is there to save the day. So this is an interesting take on a tracker, because he's actually physically tracking her, literally following her to make sure that she is safe, because he is very worried about her going to this dangerous sort of country and getting herself into trouble, and luckily for her that she is there. And later he becomes so obsessed with her that he does end up putting a tracker under her skin as well. Next up I've got Mafia Madman by Mila Finelli. This is book 3 in the Kings of Italy series. This particular romance is between Gia and Enzo. Now Enzo played quite a big role in books 1 and 2 of this series, and he is the arch enemy of Fausto from that series. In fact, Fausto hates Enzo so much that he actually kidnapped him, kept him captive in his basement and tortured him during books 1 and 2. Now during the first 2 books, Enzo does end up escaping from this captivity, and then he goes to a secret location to, you know, get better, because he's seriously injured while he's been under Fausto's care, but also kind of start to rebuild his empire, plot and scheme to get Fausto back. And at the start of this book, he happens to bump into Gia, who is Frankie's sister. Frankie is the heroine from books 1 and 2. Gia is Frankie's sister, and she is a fashion designer, and she happens to be working in Paris, I believe she's in. And Enzo basically bumps into her. She's unprotected, without a bodyguard, and he thinks this is the perfect opportunity to kidnap Gia, take her captive, and use it to get his revenge on Fausto. And so this is a captor-captor romance between Gia and Enzo, and of course they end up falling in love. Now this recommendation video features trackers, but there's a very clever point in here, because Enzo doesn't put a tracker on Gia. However, somebody else in this book has a tracker on them, and that tracker is used by Fausto to figure out where Enzo is, so that he can basically finish what he started in the first 2 books in this series. So I'm not going to say any more than that, but I thought this again was an interesting use of a tracker. So next up I've got His Tesoro by Emilia Rossi, and this is book 1 in her Empire of Royals series. In fact, book 2 has just come out. I haven't read it yet, but I will have done by the time you're watching this video, I'm sure. This one follows Sofia and Matteo, and Sofia is a Russian mafia princess, and Matteo is the head of an Italian family, and they are actually arranged in marriage. Now Matteo has never really wanted a wife. He's not interested in romantic involvement, but he is a very keen businessman, and he knows marrying Sofia is a good business opportunity, and so it's his plan to basically marry her, take her home, look after her as his wife, but has no intention of really getting to know her, falling in love with her, or having a proper relationship with her. As a result, he doesn't ask too many questions when he agrees to this marriage, and he doesn't even look at a photo of her, so he has no idea what she looks like or anything about her. He doesn't really care. He just wants to cement this relationship with her father. And so when he actually turns up for the wedding, he sees her coming down the aisle. He's shocked to see that she is in a wheelchair, and also that her father is not walking her down the aisle. Now our heroine, Sofia, she actually suffers from a condition called EDS, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that she has very weakened joints. She is fatigued very easily. She suffers from chronic pain, and this makes it difficult for her to walk sometimes, so she needs walking aids. Sometimes she can just get around with a rotunda. Other times she does in fact need to use a wheelchair. Now her father is very, very embarrassed by this situation. He feels that it's a weakness, and as a member of the Russian mafia, her father does not like any form of weakness, and so he's treated his daughter pretty horribly throughout the years, almost been abusive towards her, and she's led a very kind of lonely life, really struggled with her condition because she's not had proper medical attention or any proper treatment, and in fact even the wheelchair that she is in has been stolen and isn't actually suitable for her needs, but it's the best she could do. So like I say, Matteo is pretty upset about this situation, not because she is in a wheelchair, but because one, her father didn't tell her, and 2, it's clear that her father has been mistreating her, and Matteo is enraged by this. And of course, after the wedding, he does take her home and he sets about making sure that she has absolutely everything she needs for her comfort, including all of the proper equipment and also the medical attention that she needs. Now, he still has no intention of really getting to know her, falling in love with her, but of course she is absolutely amazing. She's such a wonderful person. She absolutely wins over all of his men, and slowly but surely he cannot stay away from her. He starts to fall in love with her when he finds out just how wonderful she is, and their kind of romance goes from there. Now, there is a use of a tracker in here, and this is a situation where the tracker is actually in a piece of jewellery that he's given her, and the tracker is in a necklace. So I've got a couple of other recommendations as well where trackers are in jewellery items that have been given to the heroines by the heroes, but you'll have to read this book to see if this plays a part in the plot at all, or if it's just a very decorative item around her neck that may come into effect at some point in the future. The next one also features a necklace, and it's called Blurred Red Lines by Cora Kenborn. This is book 1 in the Carrera cartel, and we are following Val and Eden. Now, Val is the heir to the cartel in Mexico, but currently heads up the kind of Texas arm of this cartel, and so he's really in training to take over from his father in the future. Now, Eden is the daughter of a man who owes the cartel a lot of money, so we're in the situation where her father is, you know, a gambler, he's an alcoholic, he has borrowed a lot of money from the cartel, now can't pay it back, really in quite a lot of trouble. And at the start of this book, Eden's a bartender working in a bar. She has met Val because Val has come in and she's been able to, you know, make him drinks and that sort of thing. He's quite taken with her, she kind of likes him. But one night when the bar is supposed to be closed, she goes back to get her keys because she's forgotten them. She gets to the car park, she realises she's forgotten her keys. She goes back into the bar, and when she gets back into the bar, she sees her brother being tortured by the cartel and ultimately unalived. And so now she's this witness to this crime. Val takes her captive to, one, keep her quiet because obviously she's a witness to a crime, but also to try and uncover exactly what's gone on, because a couple of things have happened here that should not have happened. One, the brother was taken in error because they mistook him for her father, and so they kind of took the wrong person. So her poor brother was tortured and unalived when it was really her father that should have been in that situation. Not only that, but Val never intended to unalive her brother. In fact, his men beat him up a little bit, then left him to his own devices. But somebody else, another enemy, came in to finish off her brother. And so definitely there's something going on here, and Val really needs to uncover what it is, and he kind of needs Eden's help for it. Now, like I said, the tracker in this story is to do with a necklace that the heroine is wearing, but it hasn't been given to her by Val, it's actually been given to her by her father, and that's all I'm going to say on that, but it makes for a very interesting use of a tracker later in this story. The next one is Stolen Touches by Neva Altaj. This is book 5 in the Perfectly Imperfect series, and we were following Mylene and Salvatore. Now, Salvatore is an absolutely obsessed hero. He's a bit of a psychopath. He does suffer from OCD, and he becomes absolutely obsessed with our heroine. So much so that initially he stalks her. He stalks her all the time. He puts up cameras so he can constantly, you know, observe where she is, who she's with, who she's speaking to, when she's home, all of that. And even when they get together and they're finally in a relationship, he can't let this go. He has to know where she is at all times, and so he constantly is tracking her, and she also has to report in every hour on the hour. She has to ring him and let him know that she's okay, and if she doesn't, then he either turns up where she is or rings her or basically punishes her for not getting in touch. So I thought this was a great example of a hero that's absolutely obsessed, but to the point of compulsion where he absolutely has to know where she is at all times, and like I say, even forces her to check in. So would definitely recommend Stolen Touches. Next up we have Unholy Vows by Mila Kane. This is book 1 in her original Sin duet, and we were following Renata and Charlie. Now in this one, it's actually Charlie and her sister who are witness to a crime. When Renata realises that they've seen something they shouldn't, he gives Charlie a bit of an ultimatum: marry him or he'll unalive both her and her sister. And so of course Charlie agrees to marry Renata. But again, Renato is a very obsessive, possessive kind of hero, and he does inject her with a tracker under her skin so that he can follow her at all times. He doesn't really trust her, he thinks she might escape, but also for her safety, right? So just in case something should happen, he will be able to find her. The interesting thing about this is that she knows the tracker is there, and when she does attempt to leave with her sister at one point in this story, she actually gets her sister to cut the tracker out of her arm. And so later on in the book, instead of putting a new tracker in her, knowing that she'll probably just cut it out again, he actually gives her a ring, and in this ring is a tracker. So there's a couple of different types of tracking in this book that goes on, but again, another kind of fun read, one that I definitely recommend. Next up, I want to recommend Disclaim by Pam Godwin. This is book 3 in the Deliver series. Now, when I read this, I just assumed it was going to be a dark romance that focuses on sex trafficking. But when I started to read this, I also realised it involved the cartel, and so technically this is also a mafia romance, right? So I'd say it's a dark mafia romance with a captor-captor situation between Camilla and Matthias. Now, Camilla and Matthias were childhood sweethearts. They were always going to be together. They were in love. But Matthias was taken when he was 18 by the cartel, and he disappeared from Camilla's life. Just about a year later, Camilla herself was also taken, and she was taken by Van, who is the hero from book 2, because he at the time worked for a sex trafficking ring and was the person who trained the slaves almost before they were then sold to their new masters. And so Camilla was trained by Van and held captive by him for about a year. Once she was rescued, she then made it her mission to basically bring down as many sex trafficking rings as she can, rescuing the victims and unaliving any baddies that were kind of involved in this. Now, she's hot on the trail of a particular sex trafficking ring, and she can't quite get to the source of what's going on. So she decides that she's going to go undercover by deliberately being taken by this sex trafficking ring and then getting into the middle of things so she can figure out exactly who's in charge and where they are. And she thinks that she will be safe because she ends up putting a tracker in her tooth. So she basically gets one of her teeth drilled, a tracker placed in her tooth, and then resealed, and she thinks that that will then mean that her teammates can keep an eye on her. They'll know exactly where she is, they'll be able to go in and rescue her, and so this is kind of her plan. But imagine her horror when she gets to her destination to find out that the person who's taken her and is now keeping her captive is her old flame, Matthias, and not only that, he is now the head of the cartel. So that's all I'm going to say about that, but it was a really fantastic read, as you can imagine, from Pam Godwin. Next up, we've got Blood of My Monster by Rina Kent. This is actually book 1 of the Monster trilogy, and we are following Kirill and Sasha. So this is a mafia romance. He is part of the Russian mafia. At the start of this book, he's actually in the Russian military. Sasha is undercover as a man in the military, ends up joining his elite team, and then when he finally leaves the armed forces to go back to New York and head up the Bratva there, when his father passes away, he goes back to take over the mafia. Sasha then goes with him as his bodyguard. Now, throughout this whole book, she's actually undercover as a man. Obviously, Kirill knows that she's a man, and they have a secret kind of relationship with each other behind closed doors, shall we say. However, Kirill is a very possessive, obsessed hero. He knows that Sasha is keeping secrets from him. Obviously, he knows that she's pretending to be a man, but he doesn't know why, and she doesn't freely give him this information. So he becomes a little bit paranoid and a little bit suspicious, and highly suspects that she's got a boyfriend somewhere in Russia. And so when she has to go back to Russia for a bit of a family emergency, he automatically jumps to conclusions and thinks that she is going to meet her lover, and so he basically puts quite a few trackers in her items, like in her pocket, in her shoes, in a handbag, in the hope that he is going to be able to follow her to Russia and figure out exactly who this lover is and what she's doing behind his back. The next book is a book which I think has one of the best uses of a tracker, and I'm not going to exactly tell you how it's used, but this is the Twist to Me series by Zaires. So this is a very toxic relationship between Julian and Nora. Now this is a quintessential captive scenario. Julian, our hero, is a complete psychopath, and the moment he sees Nora, our heroine, he's absolutely taken with her and he is desperate to be with her. And so what does any good psychopath do? He drugs her, takes her to a remote island that he owns, and then decides that he's going to train her to be his submissive / slave. And so they have this kind of master-slave kind of relationship between them. And of course, at first, Nora doesn't want to be part of this relationship, but like I say, Julian very much trains her in a very deliberate way in order to be with him. This is a trilogy, and of course, over the course of the trilogy, Nora does start to fall in Julian, but it's a very toxic relationship for quite some time. Still, like I said, when he first takes her, she's going to be on an island trapped by him, but it's not going to be too long before they kind of need to leave and go somewhere else. Now, Julian, because he's so obsessed with her, he does inject a GPS tracker under her skin so he can make sure that he can track her at all times, and if anything happens to her, he can obviously find her. Now this tracker does come in very handy indeed, but I'm not going to tell you exactly how it's used because it's not used in the traditional way, and I thought it was a great example of how trackers can be used in plot points in a very non-traditional way. So would definitely recommend that series if you're interested in that type of scenario. Finally then, I'm going to end on something much lighter, and that is Roman by Melanie Moreland, and this is book 2 in the Men of the Falls series. This is a very light Canadian mafia romance. Our hero in this one, as the name suggests, is Roman, and then our heroine in this is Effie. Now at the start of this story, Roman has a visit from Effie's sister because Effie's sister owes Roman quite a lot of money. She is a very manipulative, scheming kind of woman and not very nice at all. But she does owe Roman quite a bit of money, so Roman kind of wants, obviously, her to pay the debt. She doesn't have the cash, so as any manipulative, scheming, uncaring person would, she offers her sister as payment, and she says to Roman, I can't pay you, but you know what, my sister is beautiful, she's amazing, how about you can just have her? And of course Roman is very, very unhappy about this offer, and he is absolutely horrified and outraged that a woman would actually barter up her sister to pay off her debt. And so Roman obviously turns her away and says no, but he doesn't get a very good feeling about this at all, so he decides he's going to pay a visit to the sister. And when he goes to see the sister, he's very taken with her straight away. She is a lovely person, she owns her own bakery, and he is very concerned about her well-being. And so he goes into the bakery and sort of warns her that her sister might be up to no good. And of course Effie is no stranger to this. Her sister has been the bane of her life for a long time, always asking for money, you know, always expecting quite a lot from her sister, and Effie's almost at the end of her tether with it all. But thanks Roman for the heads up, and Roman goes on his way, but not before leaving her his business card and says, if you ever need anything, here's my number, you know how to get in touch. Now the interesting thing is here is that this business card actually does have a tracker in it, and when her sister actually does sell Effie to someone else, not to Roman, but she thinks, Roman didn't want her, but I'm sure I can sell her to someone else and get some cash, and then I can pay off my debt with Roman. When this happens, she sells Effie, turns up and gives Roman the cash, and then obviously Roman is going to be very, very suspicious about where she got the money from, goes to see if the sister is still okay. When he realises that she is not okay, in fact she is not there, he is able then to track her using the business card that he gave her. And I thought that was a very interesting way of using a tracker, very interesting item, because obviously we've seen trackers under the skin, we've seen trackers on phones, we've seen trackers in jewellery, but this was a different type of item that actually had a tracker in it, and I thought it was really, really interesting, and I wanted to therefore include it in this recommendation video. So there we go, that's 12 Mafia Romance recommendations that feature trackers in them in some way. Like I said, it did contain a few spoilers, I'm sorry about that, but I did try to not give too much away, so it's still a little bit of a surprise for you in terms of how it is actually used if you get around to reading these books. Now, I really love the use of trackers, so if you've got any recommendations for me, I would absolutely love to hear them, so please don't hesitate to put those in the comments box down below. And as always, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content from me, and all that's left for me to do is thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Takes her and drugs her, basically, takes her. At the moment Julian sees Nora, he is absolutely, but still a tracker was used in this plot but still a tracker was used in this book to So next up I've got His Tesoro by Emilia Rossi, and this is book 1 in her Empire of Right. Next up I've got His Tesoro by Emilia Rossi, and this is book 1 in her, what is it, book 1 in what?